I'm Madison Clark, 28 years old, and I thought I knew everything about trust and family loyalty. That belief shattered on a Tuesday morning in March when I opened an envelope from Wells Fargo congratulating me on my recent auto loan approval for $47,000. The problem? I hadn't applied for any loan. I hadn't even been car shopping. Standing in my kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at paperwork for a vehicle I'd never seen, my hands began to tremble. This wasn't a mistake. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would reveal just how far someone I loved would go to destroy my life. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The congratulatory letter felt heavy in my hands as I read through the details. According to the bank, Madison Elizabeth Clark of 1247 Sunset Boulevard, Phoenix, Arizona, had successfully secured financing for a 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLE 350. The monthly payment was listed as $738, and the loan term stretched 7 years into the future. My credit score, apparently, had been excellent enough to qualify for their premium rate. Every detail was accurate, except for one crucial fact. I had never set foot in a Mercedes dealership, let alone signed papers for a luxury SUV that cost more than I made in an entire year. My first instinct was to call the bank immediately. Surely this was some sort of clerical error, a case of mistaken identity or crossed files. But as I reached for my phone, a cold realization began to creep through my chest. Someone had used my personal information to secure this loan. Someone who knew my full name, my address, my social security number, and enough about my financial history to convince a bank to hand over nearly $50,000. The list of people with access to that kind of detailed information about my life was disturbingly short. My parents, Thomas and Susan Clark, certainly had most of those details, but they were financially comfortable and had no reason to commit fraud. My ex-boyfriend Marcus had known some of my information, but we'd broken up 8 months ago and parted on relatively good terms. That left one person who had complete access to every piece of personal data a fraudster would need: my younger sister Natalie. Natalie Clark was 25 years old and had always been the wild child of our family. Where I had spent my college, years studying business administration and working part-time jobs to minimize student debt, Natalie had bounced between 3 different universities, changing majors 4 times before finally dropping out in her junior year. She'd moved back into our childhood home in Scottsdale with our parents, supposedly to figure things out. But that had been 3 years ago, and she seemed no closer to establishing any kind of stable direction in her life. Our parents, successful real estate developers who had built their wealth through decades of careful investments and hard work, had always been more patient with Natalie than I thought she deserved. When she racked up credit card debt during her college experiments, they paid it off. When she crashed the car they'd bought her, they replaced it without question. When she decided to pursue a career as an Instagram influencer, they funded her lifestyle while she built what she claimed would eventually become a lucrative personal brand. I had watched these patterns with growing frustration over the years, but I'd kept my opinions to myself. After graduating with my business degree, I'd landed a position as a financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Phoenix. The work was demanding but rewarding, and I'd worked my way up from entry-level analyst to senior analyst over the past 4 years. My salary was respectable, though not extravagant, and I'd been diligent about saving money and building a solid financial foundation for my future. My apartment in the Camelback East area was modest but comfortable, a 1-bedroom unit in a well-maintained complex with a pool and fitness center. I'd furnished it carefully over the years, choosing pieces that would last rather than following every trend. My 2019 Honda Civic was practical and reliable, purchased used but in excellent condition. I took pride in living within my means and building wealth slowly but surely through careful budgeting and consistent investing. Natalie's approach to money was the complete opposite of mine. She lived for the moment, making impulsive purchases, and assuming that somehow everything would work out financially. Her Instagram account, A Natalie Lives Large, showcased a lifestyle of expensive restaurants, designer clothing, and luxury travel that seemed impossible to sustain on her inconsistent income from sponsored posts and occasional modeling gigs. When I'd asked her about it during family dinners, she'd been vague about her financial strategies, claiming that she was diversifying her revenue streams and building her brand for long-term success. The more I thought about that, Mercedes loan approval letter, the more convinced I became that Natalie was somehow involved. She would have had access to my personal documents during the many times she'd stayed at my apartment over the years. I'd been generous with my privacy, never thinking twice about leaving mail on my counter or important papers in my home office when she visited. She'd even house-sat for me during a week-long business trip to Denver last fall, giving her unlimited access to everything in my apartment, but suspecting my sister of identity theft and proving it were two entirely different matters. I needed to approach this situation carefully and methodically. My first step was to call Wells Fargo and get more information about the loan application process. After navigating through their phone system and waiting on hold for 23 minutes, I finally reached a customer service representative named Jennifer who seemed genuinely concerned about my situation. "I'm looking at the application here," Jennifer said, her voice professional but sympathetic. "It shows that Madison Clark applied in person at our Scottsdale branch on March 15th. She provided a driver's license, social security card, and 2 recent pay stubs as verification. Everything appeared to be in order, which is why the loan was approved." March 15th. I checked my calendar and confirmed what I already knew. I had been at work that entire day, attending a client meeting that lasted from 2 p.m. until after 5 p.m. There were at least 12 witnesses who could verify my whereabouts, including my boss and the clients themselves. Someone had impersonated me at that bank, and they'd done it convincingly enough to fool trained professionals. "I need to see copies of all the documentation that was provided," I told Jennifer. "This is clearly a case of identity theft, and I need to understand exactly how someone was able to convince your staff that they were me." Jennifer explained the process for disputing fraudulent accounts and assured me that the bank would investigate thoroughly. However, she also warned me that until the investigation was complete, I would be considered responsible for the debt. The thought of a $47,000 loan appearing on my credit report made my stomach churn. I'd worked so hard to maintain an excellent credit score, and now it was being jeopardized by someone else's criminal activity. After ending the call with Wells Fargo, I immediately contacted the 3 major credit bureaus to place fraud alerts on my accounts. The representatives at Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion were efficient and helpful, walking me through the process of protecting my credit while the investigation proceeded. They also provided me with free copies of my credit reports so I could check for any other unauthorized activity. When the reports arrived via email an hour later, my worst fears were confirmed. The Mercedes loan was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 6 months, someone had opened 4 different credit accounts in my name: a Chase Freedom credit card with a $8,500 limit, a Best Buy store card with a $3,000 limit, a Macy's department store card with a $2,200 limit, and a personal loan from Lending Club for $12,000. The total fraudulent debt amounted to over $72,000, and according to the credit reports, most of these accounts were already showing late payments and high balances. The systematic nature of the fraud became clear as I studied the timeline. The accounts had been opened gradually, starting with smaller amounts and building up to the major auto loan. Whoever was doing this had been careful to establish a pattern of successful payments initially, building credibility before going for the larger scores. It was a sophisticated scheme that showed planning and patience, not the work of some random criminal who had stumbled across my information. I printed out all the documentation and spread it across my dining table, creating a timeline of the fraudulent activity. The Lending Club personal loan had been the first, approved in September of the previous year. Then came the Macy's card in November, followed by the Best Buy card in December. The Chase Freedom card had been approved in January, and finally the Mercedes loan in March. Each application had apparently included proper documentation and had been approved without question. The addresses on all the accounts were variations of locations I recognized. The Lending Club loan listed an apartment complex in Tempe where Natalie had briefly lived with a boyfriend 2 years ago. The credit cards used a P.O. box in Scottsdale that I didn't recognize, but the zip code was the same as our parents' neighborhood. Only the Mercedes loan used my actual current address, which made sense since that was the account they wanted me to discover. The one that would trigger my investigation into the rest of the scheme. As I sat surrounded by evidence of what was clearly a massive identity theft operation, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger was the strongest. Rage at the violation of my privacy, my security, and my financial future. But underneath the anger was a profound sadness that someone in my own family had betrayed me so completely. If Natalie was indeed responsible for this, it meant that every family gathering, every sisterly conversation, every moment of trust had been a lie. The practical implications were staggering. Even if I could prove that these accounts were fraudulent, the process of clearing my credit would take months or possibly years. In the meantime, my ability to get approved for a mortgage, a car loan, or even rent a new apartment would be severely compromised. The life I'd been building, the financial security I'd worked so hard to achieve, was now in jeopardy because someone I trusted had decided to steal my identity for their own benefit. I needed more proof before I could confront anyone. The evidence was circumstantial, even though my instincts told me exactly who was responsible. I decided to hire a private investigator to help me gather concrete evidence of the fraud. After researching local firms online, I settled on Desert Investigations, a company that specialized in financial crimes and had excellent reviews from previous clients. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to Desert Investigations' office in Central Phoenix. The lead investigator, a former police detective named Robert Martinez, listened to my story with professional interest and assured me that identity theft cases like mine were unfortunately common, though rarely on such a large scale. The good news is that if this was done by someone close to you, they've probably left a trail, Martinez explained. Family members tend to get sloppy because they don't expect to get caught. They use familiar addresses, reference information that connects back to their real lives, and often continue using the fraudulent accounts in ways that can be traced. Martinez quoted me a fee that was substantial but manageable, and I agreed to hire his firm immediately. Time was crucial. The longer the fraudulent accounts remained active, the more damage would be done to my credit, and the more difficult it would become to unravel the scheme. He promised to begin investigating within 24 hours and to provide me with regular updates on his progress. Walking back to my car after meeting with the private investigator, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Hope that I would soon have answers and could begin the process of reclaiming my financial identity. Dread that those answers would confirm my worst suspicions about my sister and potentially destroy our family relationships forever. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, debating whether to call Natalie directly and ask her about the fraudulent accounts. Part of me wanted to give her the opportunity to confess and make things right before involving law enforcement. But Martinez had warned me against confronting suspected perpetrators before gathering solid evidence. If Natalie was indeed guilty, alerting her to my investigation could give her time to cover her tracks or create additional problems for me. Instead, I decided to visit our parents and see if I could learn anything about Natalie's recent financial situation without revealing my suspicions. If she had been living lavishly on stolen money, there might be signs that our parents had noticed. I called my mother and arranged to come for dinner the following evening, claiming that I'd been working too much and needed some family time. The drive to my parents' house in Scottsdale the next evening felt surreal. The familiar neighborhoods and landmarks looked the same, but everything felt different knowing what I now suspected about my sister. As I pulled into the circular driveway of my childhood home, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked near the garage, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz GLE 350 with temporary plates. My heart stopped. There, sitting in my parents' driveway, was a vehicle that matched the exact description of the car I was supposedly making payments on. The car that someone had fraudulently purchased using my identity was parked at my family home, gleaming under the desert sunset, like evidence of a crime I was only beginning to understand. Standing in my parents' driveway, staring at the black Mercedes that represented the destruction of my financial security, I felt my world tilt sideways. The temporary plates caught the evening light, their pristine whiteness a stark contrast to the dark metal they adorned. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some elaborate mix-up by the banking system. This was theft, plain and simple, and the perpetrator was someone who shared my DNA. I pulled out my phone and took several photographs of the vehicle, making sure to capture the license plate number, the VIN visible through the windshield, and the distinctive wheel design that matched the specifications in my loan documents. My hands shook slightly as I documented what would likely become evidence in a criminal case against my own sister. The front door of my childhood home opened before I could finish photographing the car. My mother, Susan Clark, emerged wearing her typical evening attire of designer jeans and a silk blouse, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite having spent the day at her real estate office. At 53, she maintained the polished appearance that had helped make her one of Scottsdale's most successful property agents. "Madison, sweetheart, you're here early," she called out, walking toward me with arms extended for her usual greeting hug. "I was just starting dinner. Your father is still in his office finishing up some blueprints, but he'll be down soon." I accepted her embrace while my mind raced with questions I wasn't sure how to ask. How long had the Mercedes been parked here? Did my parents know how Natalie had acquired it? Were they somehow complicit in the fraud, or were they as oblivious as I had been until 3 days ago? "Nice car," I managed to say, gesturing toward the Mercedes while trying to keep my voice neutral. "Is it new?" Mom's face lit up with pride. "Oh, that's Natalie's new baby. She just got it last week. Can you believe it? She's been working so hard on her social media business, and apparently one of her sponsorship deals came through with a huge bonus. She was so excited when she drove it home." The casual way my mother delivered this information made my stomach churn. Natalie had not only stolen my identity and destroyed my credit, but she'd also created an elaborate lie to cover her tracks with our parents. The sponsorship deal was a fiction designed to explain how someone with no steady income could suddenly afford a luxury vehicle worth nearly $50,000. "That's amazing," I replied, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. "What kind of sponsorship deal was it?" "Some fitness company, I think. You know how your sister is with all those health and wellness posts. She said they were so impressed with her engagement rates that they offered her a brand ambassador contract with a signing bonus." Mom beamed with maternal pride. "I'm so glad she's finally found her niche. Your father and I were starting to worry that she'd never settle into a career." Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound of betrayal. Natalie hadn't just stolen money from me. She'd woven an intricate web of lies to make our parents believe in her success. The fitness company story was clever. It provided a plausible explanation for sudden wealth while playing into Natalie's established social media persona. "Is she here tonight?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She should be back any minute. She went out to celebrate with some friends from her yoga studio. I think she's planning to take them all to dinner at that new steakhouse downtown." Mom's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "Actually, Madison, I wanted to talk to you about something. Your sister has been spending quite a bit of money lately, and while I'm thrilled about her success, I hope she's being responsible about taxes and savings. This was my opening, a chance to plant seeds of doubt without revealing my hand completely. What do you mean by quite a bit? Well, there's the car, of course, but she's also been shopping extensively. New clothes, expensive skincare products, that Apple Watch she's been wanting. Last weekend, she mentioned booking a trip to Tulum for some kind of influencer retreat. It just seems like a lot all at once, even with a good sponsorship deal. My mother's intuition was picking up on the inconsistencies in Natalie's story, but she was interpreting them through the lens of parental concern rather than criminal suspicion. I realized I had an opportunity to gather more information without arousing suspicion. Has she mentioned any other business ventures? Maybe she's diversifying her income streams? I suggested using language that would appeal to our parents' entrepreneurial mindset. She did say something about consulting for other influencers, helping them build their brands, and there was mention of some kind of investment opportunity, though she was vague about the details. Mom paused, studying my face with the perceptive gaze that had made her successful in real estate negotiations. Why do you ask? You seem unusually interested in your sister's finances. Before I could formulate a response, the sound of a car door slamming announced Natalie's arrival. Through the front window, I watched my sister approach the house with the confident stride of someone who believed she was untouchable. She was wearing an outfit I didn't recognize, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, paired with a leather jacket that screamed luxury brand. Her long blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and her makeup was flawless despite having been out all evening. "Madison!" Natalie exclaimed as she entered the house, immediately pulling me into an enthusiastic hug. "I didn't know you were coming for dinner tonight. This is perfect. I have so much to tell you about my new business ventures." The irony of her words made me want to laugh and scream simultaneously. She did indeed have business ventures to discuss, but they involved systematically destroying my financial life rather than building any legitimate enterprise. "Mom mentioned you got a new car," I said, studying her face carefully for any signs of guilt or nervousness. Natalie's smile widened, and I saw no hint of deception in her expression. Either she was an exceptionally skilled liar, or she had somehow convinced herself that what she was doing was justified. "Isn't it gorgeous? I've been dreaming about a Mercedes for years, and when Fit Life Nutrition offered me that ambassador contract with the signing bonus, I knew it was time to treat myself." The details of her lie were becoming more elaborate. Fit Life Nutrition was apparently the fictional company that had supposedly provided her sudden wealth. I made a mental note to research whether such a company actually existed, though I suspected it was entirely fabricated. "That must have been quite a bonus," I observed, keeping my tone conversational. Honestly, I couldn't believe it myself. They were so impressed with my content and my audience engagement that they offered me more than I ever imagined possible. Natalie's enthusiasm seemed genuine, which only made the situation more disturbing. The best part is that this is just the beginning. I'm in talks with several other brands now, and my rates have gone up significantly since I can show them the Fit Life success. My father chose that moment to join us in the living room, still wearing his work clothes, but looking more relaxed than he had during recent family gatherings. Thomas Clark was a successful architect whose firm had designed some of Scottsdale's most distinctive commercial buildings. At 55, he maintained the analytical mindset that had made him successful in his profession, and I hoped that quality might make him more skeptical of Natalie's sudden windfall. "There's my other daughter," he said, giving me a warm hug. "How's the investment world treating you?" "It's been interesting lately," I replied, then decided to test the waters. "Actually, I've been dealing with some unusual financial issues. Someone tried to open accounts using my personal information." The change in Natalie's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The bright smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, and I caught a brief flash of something: fear, guilt, in her eyes before her cheerful expression returned. "That's terrible," she said quickly. "Identity theft is so common these days. I hope you caught it before any real damage was done." Unfortunately, they managed to open several accounts before I discovered what was happening. The investigation is ongoing. I continued watching her closely, looking for any additional tells that might confirm my suspicions. "Have you figured out how they got your information?" Dad asked, his professional curiosity engaged. "These criminals are getting more sophisticated all the time. The police think it was someone with access to personal documents, mail, tax, returns, that sort of thing. They suspect it might be someone I know personally, since the perpetrator had very detailed information about my life." This time, Natalie's reaction was more pronounced. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair and reached for her wine glass with slightly trembling fingers. "That's so scary to think about. I mean, who could you possibly trust if people you know might steal from you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. My sister had just articulated the exact betrayal she had committed, either completely oblivious to the irony or testing to see how much I suspected. Mom, sensing some tension but misunderstanding its source, stepped in with her usual peacemaking instincts. "Let's not dwell on unpleasant topics over dinner. Madison, you must be stressed about this situation. Maybe we should talk about something more positive." "Actually," Natalie said, suddenly animated again, "I wanted to show you some of the amazing photos from my shoot with FitLife. They're going to be featured in their national advertising campaign." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through professional quality photographs of herself in athletic wear, posing with various fitness products. The images were well produced and convincing, lending credibility to her cover story. I realized she had either paid for these photos herself using my stolen money, or she had created an entirely fictional portfolio to support her lies. "These are beautiful, honey," Mom said admiringly. "You look like a real model." The photographer said I have natural talent for this kind of work. He's connected with several other major brands, and he thinks I could really make it big in the influencer marketing space. Natalie's confidence was mesmerizing, even knowing what I knew about the source of her newfound wealth. During dinner, I found myself in the surreal position of listening to my sister describe her plans for spending my money. She talked about upgrading her wardrobe for professional photo shoots, traveling to exotic locations for content creation, and investing in high-end equipment to improve her social media production quality. Every dollar she planned to spend was money that had been stolen from my future. The conversation revealed just how deep the deception ran. Natalie had created an alternate reality where she was a successful entrepreneur making smart business investments rather than a criminal systematically destroying her sister's financial security. Our parents, proud of what they believed was their daughter's finally achieving success, were inadvertently enabling her by celebrating her accomplishments and encouraging her continued spending. As the evening progressed, I began to understand the psychological complexity of what Natalie had done. This wasn't a simple case of someone stealing money for drugs or gambling debts. She had constructed an elaborate fantasy life and was using my identity to fund it. The Mercedes, the designer clothes, the expensive lifestyle. These weren't just purchases, they were props in a performance designed to convince everyone, including herself, that she was successful. When it came time to leave, Natalie walked me to my car, chattering excitedly about her plans for the weekend. "I'm thinking of driving up to Sedona tomorrow to do a sunrise yoga shoot. The lighting up there is supposed to be incredible for photography." "Sounds expensive," I observed. "Oh, it is, but you have to invest in quality content if you want to build a premium brand. Besides, I can write it off as a business expense now that I'm officially a professional influencer." She paused beside my modest Honda Civic, and for a moment I saw her comparing it to the gleaming Mercedes parked nearby. "You know, Madison, if you ever want to upgrade your car situation, I could probably get you a great deal through some of my new business connections." The audacity of the offer. My sister suggesting she could help me buy a car using contacts she'd supposedly made through fraudulent activities funded by my stolen identity was breathtaking in its shamelessness. Driving home from my parents' house that night, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The casual way Natalie had offered to help me get a better car deal using her supposed business connections felt like salt in an open wound. She was literally offering to help me purchase a vehicle using the same fraudulent network she'd employed to steal my identity. The psychological manipulation was so complex that I wondered if she'd somehow convinced herself that what she was doing wasn't actually theft. I spent the next morning at Morrison & Associates trying to focus on my work, but concentration proved impossible. Every time I looked at financial reports or analyzed investment portfolios, I was reminded of my own financial security crumbling thanks to my sister's criminal activities. My colleague Jennifer Walsh noticed my distraction during our 10 a.m. team meeting. "Madison, you seem a million miles away today. Everything okay?" she asked as we gathered our files after the presentation. Jennifer and I had been friends since my first day at the firm 4 years ago. She was one of the few people who knew about my family dynamics and had listened to me vent about Natalie's irresponsible behavior on numerous occasions. I trusted her judgment and desperately needed someone to talk to about the impossible situation I found myself in. "Can we grab lunch today? I need to run something by you that's pretty serious," I said quietly, glancing around to make sure our conversation couldn't be overheard by other colleagues. We met at a small cafe near the office where the ambient noise would provide privacy for sensitive conversations. Over salads and iced tea, I laid out the entire situation for Jennifer, from the initial discovery of the Mercedes loan to the previous night's dinner at my parents' house. Her expressions shifted from concern to shock to outright anger as I detailed the scope of the fraud. "Madison, this is insane. She's stolen over $70,000 using your identity, and your parents think she's some kind of business success story?" Jennifer shook her head in disbelief. "You have to report this to the police immediately." "That's what my private investigator recommended too, but it's not that simple. If I file criminal charges against Natalie, it's going to destroy my family. My parents will be devastated when they find out their daughter is a criminal, and there's no coming back from something like this." Jennifer leaned forward, her voice intense but compassionate. "Madison, listen to yourself. You're worried about protecting the feelings of people who raised a daughter capable of systematically destroying your life. Your sister didn't just steal money, she stole your future. Your ability to buy a house, get approved for loans, even rent an apartment is compromised because of her actions." The truth of Jennifer's words hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on the immediate shock of discovering the fraud that I hadn't fully considered the long-term implications. Even if I could prove that all the accounts were fraudulent, the damage to my credit report would take years to fully repair. In the meantime, every major financial decision in my life would be complicated by Natalie's crimes. My phone buzzed with a text message from Robert Martinez, the private investigator. "Need to meet ASAP. Found something significant. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I showed the message to Jennifer, who nodded approvingly. "Go see what he's discovered. The more evidence you have, the stronger your case will be when you decide how to handle this." I left work early and drove to Martinez's office, my anxiety building with every mile. His receptionist ushered me directly into his conference room, where he had spread out what looked like a comprehensive investigation file across the large table. "Madison, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process, but you need to understand the full scope of what your sister has done," Martinez began, his expression grave. "This isn't just identity theft for personal purchases. Natalie has created an entire fraudulent business empire using your identity." He handed me a thick folder containing bank statements, credit applications, and business registration documents. As I flipped through the pages, a horrifying picture emerged. Natalie hadn't just opened personal credit accounts in my name. She had also registered multiple business entities using my social security number and personal information. Clark Consulting Services, Clark Digital Marketing, Phoenix Wellness. Solutions. These are all companies registered under your name and social security number, Martinez explained. She's been using these fake businesses to apply for business credit cards, small business loans, and even government grants designed to help women entrepreneurs. The documentation was overwhelming. Business credit cards from American Express, Capital One, and Discover, each with credit limits ranging from $15,000 to $25,000. Small business, loans from 3 different online lenders totaling over $80,000. Most shocking of all was a small business administration loan for $35,000 that had been approved based on fabricated revenue projections and fake business documentation. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't these institutions verify the information before approving loans?" "They're supposed to, but your sister was very sophisticated in her approach. She created fake websites for each business, complete with professional designs and fabricated client testimonials. She established business phone numbers that forward to her personal cell phone, set up professional email addresses, and even created fake invoices and contracts to show business revenue." Martinez pulled out his laptop and showed me the websites Natalie had created. Clark Consulting Services claimed to be a business development firm specializing in social media strategy for small businesses. The site featured professional headshots of Madison Clark, CEO and founder, along with detailed service descriptions and impressive client success stories. Every word was a lie, but the presentation was so polished that it would easily fool Sai, a busy loan officer conducting a routine verification check. "The really disturbing part," Martinez continued, "is that she's been using these business accounts to fund her personal lifestyle while making minimum payments to keep everything current. She's essentially running a money laundering operation using your identity as the front." The Clark Digital Marketing website was even more elaborate, featuring a portfolio of supposed client campaigns, detailed case studies, and a blog filled with industry insights that Natalie had obviously plagiarized from legitimate marketing sites. The Phoenix Wellness Solutions site promoted retreats and coaching services that had never been offered, complete with fake testimonials from satisfied customers. She's been systematically building credit across multiple business entities, then using balance transfers and cash advances to move money around and fund her spending, Martinez explained. "It's sophisticated enough that it took my team 3 days to trace all the interconnected accounts and business relationships." I stared at the evidence spread across the table, trying to process the magnitude of my sister's betrayal. This wasn't impulsive spending or even simple identity theft. This was a calculated, long-term criminal enterprise that had been planned and executed with frightening precision. Natalie had essentially created an alternate version of me, a successful entrepreneur running multiple businesses, and was using that fictional identity to systematically drain credit markets. "There's more," Martinez said grimly. "I've been monitoring her recent activity, and she's not slowing down. In fact, she's accelerating. Last week, she applied for a $100,000 business line of credit from Wells Fargo, claiming that Clark Consulting Services needs expansion capital to hire additional employees. The audacity was breathtaking. Even as I was discovering her previous crimes, Natalie was actively working to steal even more money. The Wells Fargo application showed projected revenues for Clark Consulting Services exceeding $500,000 annually, supported by fabricated contracts with non-existent clients and fake financial statements that painted a picture of rapid business growth. "What happens if that loan gets approved?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Based on the documentation she's submitted and the credit history she's built using your identity, there's a good chance it will be. Your credit score, at least on paper, supports someone capable of handling that level of business debt. The fake businesses have established payment histories that make them look like legitimate, growing enterprises." The room seemed to spin around me. In the span of a week, I had gone from discovering a single fraudulent car loan to learning that I, was apparently the CEO of multiple fake companies with hundreds of thousands of dollars in outstanding debt. If the Wells Fargo line of credit was approved, the total fraudulent debt in my name would exceed $300,000. "There's something else you need to know," Martinez said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "Some of these business loans Natalie obtained are backed by Small Business Administration guarantees. That means she's not just defrauding private lenders, she's defrauding the federal government. This is going to attract FBI attention once it's reported." The mention of federal crimes made my hands tremble. I had been struggling with the decision about whether to file charges against my sister, but Martinez was telling me that the decision might be taken out of my hands. Federal agencies don't typically overlook systematic fraud involving government-backed loans, regardless of family relationships. "What do you recommend I do?" I asked. "Honestly, you need to report this immediately. Every day you wait is another day Natalie has to potentially access more credit or cover her tracks. Plus, the longer you wait to report the fraud, the more difficult it becomes to prove that you weren't complicit in the scheme." That last point hit me like a lightning bolt. In my concern about protecting my family, I hadn't considered that my delay in reporting the crimes could eventually make me look complicit. If investigators discovered that I had known about the fraud for weeks without reporting it, they might question whether I had somehow benefited from or participated in the scheme. "I'll need copies of everything you've found," I said, my decision crystallizing. "I'm going to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division today." Martinez nodded approvingly. "I've already prepared a comprehensive report documenting all of our findings. This should give federal investigators everything they need to launch their own investigation and hopefully recover some of the stolen funds." As I gathered the evidence files, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a cheerful female voice introduced herself as Amanda from Wells Fargo Business Lending. "Ms. Clark, I'm calling with excellent news about your application for the business line of credit. We're pleased to inform you that Clark Consulting Services has been approved for $100,000 in revolving credit. The funds will be available in your business account within 24 hours. I felt the blood drain from my face. Even as I was sitting in a private investigator's office preparing to report her crimes, Natalie had successfully stolen another $100,000 in my name. The criminal enterprise was operating in real time, growing, more destructive with each passing hour. "I need to call you back," I managed to say, ending the call with shaking fingers. Martinez had overheard enough of the conversation to understand what had happened. "That's the Wells Fargo line of credit. It just got approved." I nodded numbly, unable to speak. The total fraudulent debt in my name had just jumped to over $400,000. My sister hadn't just stolen my identity, she had weaponized it into a criminal enterprise that was spiraling completely out of control. The FBI field office in Phoenix was nothing like I had imagined from television shows and movies. The building was modern and sterile, with security checkpoints that reminded me more of an airport than a law enforcement facility. Special Agent Victoria Chen, who had been assigned to my case, met me in a conference room that could have belonged to any corporate office building. What distinguished it as a federal investigation center were the recording devices mounted on the walls and the gravity of the situation that had brought me there. Agent Chen was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that radiated from her eyes before she even spoke. She wore a navy blazer over dark slacks, and her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and confident. "Ms. Clark, I've reviewed the preliminary report from your private investigator, and I have to tell you that this is one of the most sophisticated identity theft schemes I've encountered. In my 8 years with the Bureau," she began, settling into the chair across from me, "your sister has essentially created a parallel financial identity that's been operating for over a year without detection." The weight of Agent Chen's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Hearing a federal agent confirm the scope of Natalie's crimes made everything suddenly feel much more real and terrifying. This wasn't just a family dispute that could be resolved with difficult conversations and loan forgiveness. This was a federal criminal investigation that would likely result in serious prison time for my sister. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "We're going to launch a comprehensive investigation into all of the fraudulent accounts and business entities registered under your name. This will involve subpoenaing records from multiple financial institutions, examining the fake websites and business documentation your sister created, and tracing the flow of funds to determine exactly how much money has been stolen and where it's gone." Agent Chen opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. "I need to walk you through some additional findings that our preliminary investigation has uncovered. Unfortunately, the situation is even more complex than what your private investigator discovered." She slid a bank statement across the table toward me. The header showed Clark Holdings LLC, another business entity I had never heard of, registered under my Social Security number. The account showed deposits totaling over $200,000 over the past 8 months, with most of the funds coming from the various fraudulent loans and credit accounts Natalie had opened. "Clark Holdings appears to be the central hub of the operation," Agent Chen explained. "Your sister has been using this account to consolidate funds from all the different sources of stolen money, then distributing payments to cover minimum balances on the various accounts to keep them current and avoid raising red flags with creditors." The sophistication of the money laundering operation was staggering. Natalie hadn't just been recklessly spending stolen money. She had created an entire financial infrastructure to manage and sustain her criminal enterprise. The Clark Holdings account showed regular transfers to personal accounts, payments to luxury retailers, and even what appeared to be payroll deposits to several individuals I didn't recognize. "Who are these people receiving payroll payments?" I asked, pointing to several recurring transactions. "We're still investigating, but it appears your sister hired accomplices to help maintain the facade of legitimate business operations. We've identified at least 3 individuals who have been posing as employees of the various fake companies, providing references to creditors, and even participating in phone verification calls during the loan application process." The revelation that Natalie had recruited others to participate in the fraud added another layer of complexity to the case. This wasn't a solo operation driven by impulsive spending. It was an organized criminal conspiracy involving multiple participants working together to systematically defraud financial institutions. Agent Chen pulled out another document, this, one bearing the letterhead of the Internal Revenue Service. "This is where things get particularly serious. Your sister has been filing business tax returns for all of these fake companies, claiming substantial revenues and taking advantage of various tax credits designed to help small businesses. She's also been issuing herself W-2 forms showing employment, income that doesn't exist. The tax fraud implications made my head spin. Not only had Natalie stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars using my identity, but she had also been filing fraudulent tax returns with the federal government. The potential penalties for tax fraud alone could result in decades of prison time, even before considering the identity theft and loan fraud charges. The IRS has been notified, and they'll be conducting their own parallel investigation," Agent Chen continued. "Tax fraud is taken very seriously, especially when it involves fabricated business entities and false claims for government credits." I stared at the fraudulent tax returns spread across the table, documents bearing my forged signature claiming income from businesses that existed only in Natalie's imagination. Clark Consulting Services had apparently earned $180,000 in its first year of operation, according to the Schedule C form filed with my tax return. Phoenix Wellness Solutions showed revenues of $95,000, while Clark Digital Marketing claimed $125,000 in annual income. "Did she actually file these with the IRS?" I asked, horrified by the implications. "Yes, and she claimed you were entitled to various tax credits based on the fabricated business income. The government has already issued refund checks totaling $18,000 based on these fraudulent filings. Those funds were deposited directly into accounts controlled by your sister." The scope of the fraud kept expanding every time Agent Chen revealed new information. Natalie hadn't just stolen my identity to obtain loans and credit cards. She had created an entire alternate financial reality, where I was a successful entrepreneur earning substantial income from multiple business ventures. The fake tax returns would have lasting implications for my legitimate tax situation, potentially triggering audits and penalties that could take years to resolve. "I need to understand something," I said, struggling to process the enormity of what I was learning. How was she able to maintain all of this without anyone noticing? The coordination required to manage dozens of accounts, file tax returns, maintain fake websites, and coordinate with accomplices seems impossible for one person to handle. Agent Chen nodded, clearly having wondered the same thing during her preliminary investigation. "Your sister is remarkably organized and disciplined when it comes to criminal activity. We've found detailed spreadsheets on her personal computer, tracking all of the various accounts, payment due dates, and minimum balance requirements. She's been treating this fraud operation like a legitimate business, with careful record-keeping and systematic planning." She showed me printouts of Excel spreadsheets that looked like sophisticated business financial models. Natalie had created tracking systems for each fraudulent account, monitoring credit utilization rates, payment histories, and available credit limits. There were even projections showing how much additional credit she expected to access over the coming months, treating the fraud like a growing business with expansion plans. The level of organization is actually what allowed the scheme to operate for so long without detection, Agent Chen explained. By making minimum payments on all accounts and keeping credit utilization below certain thresholds, she avoided triggering the automated fraud detection systems that most financial institutions use. The conference room door opened, and another agent entered carrying additional files. Agent Chen introduced him as Agent Michael Torres, a specialist in financial crimes who would be working on the investigation. Agent Torres was older, probably in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent years dealing with the worst aspects of human nature. "Ms. Clark, I've been reviewing the timeline of fraudulent activities, and I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with your sister over the past year," Agent Torres said, settling into a chair and opening his own file folder. "These questions might seem personal or intrusive, but we need to establish a clear timeline and determine whether there were any warning signs that might have indicated what she was doing." The next hour was emotionally exhausting as the agents walked me through every interaction I could remember having with Natalie over the past 18 months. They asked about her living situation, her claimed business activities, her spending patterns, and any conversations where she might have mentioned financial stress or new income sources. "Did your sister ever ask you for personal documents or information?" Agent Torres inquired. "Social security number, tax returns, bank account information, anything like that?" I thought carefully before responding. "She did house sat for me last October when I was traveling for work. She would have had access to everything in my apartment, including my home office where I keep important documents. But she never explicitly asked me for anything." "What about your parents? Did they ever provide your sister with access to documents or information about you?" This question made me uncomfortable because I realized I didn't know the answer. My parents had always been somewhat casual about family privacy, and it was entirely possible that they had shared information with Natalie without realizing the implications. "I don't know," I admitted. "My parents have access to some of my personal information, and they might have shared it with Natalie without thinking it was problematic. They see her as irresponsible but not criminal." Agent Chen made notes as we talked, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed how thoroughly the FBI intended to investigate every aspect of the case. They wanted to interview my parents, my friends, my colleagues, and anyone else who might have relevant information about Natalie's activities or my own movements during the time period when the fraud was occurring. "There's something else we need to discuss," Agent Chen said as our interview session wound down. "Your sister is continuing to actively commit crimes even as we speak. The Wells Fargo line of credit that was approved yesterday has already been accessed. She withdrew $25,000 in cash this morning. The news hit me like a physical blow. Even as federal agents were building a case against her, Natalie was still actively stealing money using my identity. The criminal enterprise was operating in real time, growing more destructive with each passing day. We need to move quickly to freeze the accounts and prevent further damage, Agent Torres explained. But we also want to monitor her activities for a few more days to see if she leads us to additional accomplices or reveals the full scope of the operation. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means that for the next week or two, your credit is going to continue taking damage while we gather evidence. I know that's not what you want to hear, but building a strong case requires patience. If we move too quickly, we might miss important evidence or allow accomplices to escape prosecution. As I left the FBI field office that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message from Natalie. "Hey sis, want to grab drinks tonight? I have exciting news about a new business opportunity." The timing was almost comically inappropriate. My sister was inviting me out for drinks to celebrate what was undoubtedly another step in her criminal enterprise, completely unaware that federal agents were at that very moment building a case that would likely send her to prison for the next decade. Staring at Natalie's text message inviting me for drinks, I felt a mixture of rage and disbelief that made my hands shake. She was celebrating new business opportunities that I now knew were additional crimes being committed in my name, completely oblivious to the federal investigation closing in around her. Agent Chen had given me her direct number with instructions to contact her immediately if Natalie attempted to involve me in any activities, and this invitation felt like exactly the kind of situation they wanted to monitor. I called Agent Chen from my car in the FBI parking garage, reading Natalie's message. Word for word, there was a brief pause before she responded, and I could hear the excitement in her voice when she spoke. "Madison, this could be exactly the opportunity we've been hoping for. If your sister is planning to discuss new fraudulent activities with you, we might be able to gather direct evidence of her criminal intent and identify additional targets before more damage is done." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. "We'd like you to wear a recording device when you meet with your sister tonight. If she discusses any of her criminal activities or reveals information about accomplices, it could be crucial evidence for our case." The thought of secretly recording my own sister made my stomach turn, even knowing what she had done to me. There was something deeply unsettling about the idea of sitting across from Natalie, sharing drinks and conversation, while federal agents listened to every word through hidden surveillance equipment. "I understand your hesitation," Agent Chen continued, clearly sensing my discomfort. "But you need to understand that every day this operation continues, your sister is potentially destroying other people's lives. The accomplices she's recruited might be using the techniques they've learned from her to victimize additional innocent people." That perspective shifted something in my thinking. I had been so focused on the personal betrayal and the damage to my own finances that I hadn't fully considered the broader implications of Natalie's criminal enterprise. If she had developed sophisticated methods for identity theft and fraud, and if she was teaching those methods to accomplices, the potential for widespread damage was enormous. "What would I need to do?" I asked. "Meet us at a secure location an hour before you're supposed to meet your sister. We'll outfit you with recording equipment and brief you on what kinds of information we're hoping to gather. The most important thing is for you to act naturally and let your sister lead the conversation toward whatever business opportunities she wants to discuss." An hour later, I found myself in an unmarked FBI surveillance van parked in a shopping center near the restaurant, where I was supposed to meet Natalie. Agent Torres was showing me a recording device that was smaller than a button, designed to be concealed in clothing where it would be virtually undetectable. "The microphone is incredibly sensitive," he explained, demonstrating how to activate and deactivate the device. "It will pick up conversations clearly even in noisy restaurant environments. The battery will last for 6 hours, which should be more than enough for your meeting." Agent Chen reviewed the legal aspects of what I was doing, explaining that Arizona was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other participants. She also stressed that I should never encourage Natalie to commit crimes or suggest illegal activities myself. Let her do the talking about business opportunities, Agent Chen instructed. If she mentions specific companies, individuals, or financial institutions, try to get as much detail as possible without being obvious about it. We're particularly interested in learning about her accomplices and whether she's planning to target additional victims. The restaurant Natalie had chosen was an upscale cocktail bar in Scottsdale, the kind of place where drinks cost $20 and the atmosphere was designed to impress. As I walked through the entrance, I was hyper-aware of the recording device, concealed in my jacket, wondering if anyone could somehow detect its presence. The hostess directed me to a corner booth where Natalie was already waiting, looking radiant in what I now recognized as another expensive outfit purchased with stolen money. "Madison, you look stressed. Work has been tough lately?" Natalie stood to hug me, and I had to resist the urge to pull away. Knowing what I knew about her criminal activities, every interaction felt contaminated by deception. "Just the usual pressures," I replied, settling into the booth across from her. "You mentioned exciting business news?" Natalie's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm I had once found endearing in my younger sister. Now it made me feel nauseated, knowing that her excitement was about crimes being committed in my name. "Oh my God, Madison, you're not going to believe the opportunities that have opened up recently. Remember how I told you about Fit Life Nutrition and the ambassador contract? Well, that was just the beginning. I've been getting contacted by companies I never even approached, wanting to work with me." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be business emails. The professional correspondence looked legitimate, with corporate logos and formal language. But I now knew that Natalie was capable of fabricating convincing documentation for any purpose. "Look at this," she said, showing me an email supposedly from a company called Apex Marketing Solutions. They want to hire Clark Consulting Services to manage social media campaigns for their clients. The contract would be worth $50,000 over 6 months, with potential for renewal. I recognized the name Clark Consulting Services as one of the fraudulent businesses registered under my identity. Natalie was showing me correspondence related to crimes being committed using my personal information, apparently completely unaware of the irony. "That sounds like a substantial contract," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "How did they find out about your consulting services?" That's the amazing part. Word of mouth. Apparently, one of my previous clients recommended me to their business network. Success breeds success, you know? When you deliver quality results, people talk about it. The casual way she discussed her fabricated client success stories was chilling. Natalie had become so immersed in her fictional business empire that she seemed to genuinely believe her own lies about satisfied customers and quality service delivery. "Who was the client who made the recommendation?" I asked, hoping to gather information about her accomplices or victims. Natalie hesitated for just a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, calculation, cross her face before she answered. "Actually, it was through Rebecca Morrison. You remember her from high school? She's been working with one of my wellness coaching clients and was so impressed with the results that she connected me with her marketing contacts." I did remember. Rebecca Morrison, a girl who had been in Natalie's graduating class. The idea that Rebecca was somehow involved in Natalie's criminal enterprise was disturbing, but I couldn't tell whether she was a willing accomplice or another victim whose identity was being exploited. "Rebecca's involved in marketing now?" I asked, fishing for more information. "She's got her own consulting business too, Morrison Strategic Solutions. We've actually been collaborating on some projects, sharing resources and referring clients to each other. It's been incredibly beneficial for both of our companies." The mention of Morrison Strategic Solutions triggered alarm bells in my memory. Agent Chen had mentioned investigating several related business entities, and I wondered if Rebecca's supposed consulting business was another fraudulent operation connected to Natalie's criminal network. Our server approached to take our orders, and Natalie ordered an expensive cocktail made with premium vodka and fresh organic ingredients. The casual way she spent money on luxury items, knowing that every dollar was stolen from my future, made me want to scream. "You should really consider starting your own consulting business, Madison," Natalie said after the server left. "With your finance background and my marketing connections, we could be an amazing team. I could help you get set up with all the business registration paperwork, website development, even initial client referrals." The audacity of her suggestion was breathtaking. She was essentially offering to help me commit the same crimes she had been perpetrating against me. The psychological manipulation was so complex that I wondered if she had somehow convinced herself that identity theft and fraud were legitimate business practices. "What would be involved in getting started?" I asked, hoping to gather more information about her methods. "Oh, it's easier than you think. The business registration process is mostly online now, and there are so many resources available for new entrepreneurs. Small business loans, government grants, credit programs designed specifically to help women get started. The financial institutions are practically throwing money at people with good credit and solid business plans." She was describing the exact process she had used to defraud multiple lenders using my identity, presenting it as a legitimate pathway to business success. The recording device was capturing every word, building the case against her with each casual admission of criminal methodology. "Have you used those programs yourself?" I asked. "Absolutely. That's how I was able to expand so quickly. When traditional financing wasn't enough to support my growth plans, I accessed additional credit through business development programs. The key is having multiple funding sources so you're not dependent on any single lender." Natalie spent the next hour describing her business expansion strategies in detail, apparently unaware that she was providing federal investigators with a comprehensive confession of her criminal activities. She discussed the importance of maintaining good credit across multiple business entities, the benefits of diversifying loan sources, and the techniques she used to present convincing business documentation to lenders. "The most important thing is confidence," she explained, gesturing with her cocktail glass. "If you present yourself as a successful entrepreneur with a track record of results, people believe you. Lenders want to work with winners, so you have to look and act like you're already successful." Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it with obvious excitement. "This is perfect timing. Rebecca just confirmed our meeting tomorrow morning. We're finalizing details for a joint venture that could be worth over $100,000. Madison, you should come with us. I think you'd be really interested in the opportunity." The invitation to join a meeting about additional criminal activities was exactly the kind of evidence Agent Chen had hoped we would gather. Natalie was not only admitting to past crimes, but actively planning future fraudulent schemes. "What kind of joint venture?" I asked. "Corporate training services. There's huge demand for companies that can help businesses optimize their financial processes and develop growth strategies. With your finance expertise and our marketing capabilities, we could really dominate that market." The irony was devastating. Natalie was describing a business model that sounded like a legitimate and potentially successful enterprise, but I knew that any joint venture would involve additional identity theft and fraud committed against innocent victims. 2 years after Natalie's sentencing, I thought the nightmare was behind me. I had rebuilt my credit, advanced in my career, and even started dating again. But on a humid Thursday morning in July, I received a call that shattered my newfound peace. It was Agent Chen, and her voice carried the same urgency I remembered from our first meeting. "Madison, we need to talk immediately. We've discovered that your sister's criminal network was far more extensive than we initially realized. There are victims across multiple states, and some of them are coming forward with information that suggests the fraud scheme continued even after her arrest." My hands began trembling as I absorbed her words. What do you mean it continued? Natalie's been in federal prison for over a year. She had established automated systems and recruited accomplices who were operating independently. We're looking at identity theft rings in Nevada, California, and Texas that all trace back to methods your sister developed. The total victim count has exceeded 300 people. The revelation that Natalie had essentially franchised her criminal methodology to other criminals was devastating. She hadn't just destroyed my life and the lives of her immediate accomplices. She had created a template for widespread identity theft that was still causing harm across the country. Agent Chen requested another meeting, and I found myself back in that familiar FBI conference room, surrounded by evidence boxes that seemed to have multiplied since my last visit. This time, however, there were additional agents from other field offices, indicating the multi-jurisdictional nature of the ongoing investigation. Your sister was more sophisticated than we gave her credit for, Agent Torres explained, showing me organizational charts that looked like corporate structures. She had created detailed instruction manuals for identity theft, complete with step-by-step guides for creating fake businesses, forging documents, and manipulating credit systems. The manuals were disturbingly professional, written in clear, accessible language with screenshots and templates that would enable virtually anyone to replicate Natalie's crimes. She had systematized identity theft to the point where it could be taught to others like a legitimate business skill. Some of these accomplices have been operating under the radar for months, using identities of people in small towns where financial monitoring is less sophisticated, another agent added. They've been particularly targeting elderly individuals and recent immigrants who might be less likely to quickly detect unauthorized accounts. Learning that Natalie's criminal legacy was still actively harming vulnerable populations made me feel sick. The elderly victims reminded me of my own grandparents, people who had worked their entire lives to build modest savings that could be wiped out by identity theft. The targeting of immigrants was particularly cruel, as these victims often had limited understanding of American credit systems and fewer resources to fight back against fraud. Agent Chen showed me case files from victims across the Southwest. Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old retired teacher in Las Vegas, had discovered $85,000 in fraudulent debt when she tried to refinance her home. David Kim, a software engineer in San Diego, found that someone had opened 17 different accounts in his name, using business entities he'd never heard of. The stories were depressingly similar to my own experience, but the geographic spread indicated how Natalie's methods had been adapted and replicated by criminal networks she'd never directly supervised. The most disturbing aspect is how they've improved on your sister's original techniques, Agent Torres continued. They're using sophisticated social engineering to gather personal information, creating fake LinkedIn profiles to establish business credibility, and even using artificial intelligence to generate convincing business websites. One case file showed a fake consulting company website that was virtually indistinguishable from legitimate business sites. The AI-generated content included detailed service descriptions, fabricated client testimonials, and even fake employee profiles with professional headshots created using computer algorithms. The level of sophistication made traditional identity verification methods almost useless. We've identified at least 12 different criminal organizations that can trace their methodologies back to documents your sister created, Agent Chen said grimly. Some of these groups are generating millions of dollars in fraudulent loans and credit accounts annually. The scale of the ongoing damage was overwhelming. What had begun as my sister's personal financial crisis had metastasized into a nationwide criminal epidemic affecting hundreds of innocent victims. I realized that my own recovery was just one small victory in a much larger battle against systematic financial fraud. Through the FBI's Victim Assistance Program, I was connected with other people whose lives had been destroyed by Natalie's criminal network and its imitators. We formed an informal support group that met monthly in Phoenix, sharing our experiences and providing practical advice for navigating the credit repair process. Jennifer Walsh, a a single mother from Tucson, had lost her job when a background check revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt associated with her name. Despite having FBI documentation proving she was a victim, some employers remained skeptical about hiring someone whose credit report showed such extensive financial problems. "It's not just about the money," Jennifer explained during one of our meetings. "It's about how people look at you differently when they think you might be financially irresponsible. I've had to explain my situation to landlords, employers, even my daughter's school when they ran a credit check for a volunteer position." Robert Martinez, a retired veteran living on a fixed income, had been forced to hire an attorney to deal with debt collectors who refused to accept FBI documentation that the accounts were fraudulent. Some collection agencies were so aggressive that they had threatened legal action against victims even after being provided with federal law enforcement evidence of the crimes. "These collectors don't care about justice or victim rights," Robert said angrily. "They just want to collect money from someone. And if the real criminals are in prison, they figure they'll go after the victims whose names are on the accounts." Our support group also included family members of victims, people who had watched their loved ones struggle with the psychological impact of identity theft. Susan Torres, whose elderly father had been targeted by one of the copycat networks, described the devastating effect on his mental health. "My father was a proud man who had never missed a payment on anything in his entire life," she told us. "When he started getting calls from debt collectors about accounts he'd never opened, he began questioning his own memory. He thought he was developing dementia because he couldn't remember applying for credit cards or loans. The psychological dimension of identity theft was something I had experienced myself, but hadn't fully understood until hearing other victims' stories. The violation of trust, the feeling of helplessness, and the constant anxiety about additional fraudulent activities created lasting trauma that extended far beyond the financial damage. As the federal investigation expanded to encompass the broader criminal network, I found myself involved in additional legal proceedings as both a witness and a victim advocate. The Department of Justice had filed charges against dozens of individuals across multiple states, and many of the cases required testimony from original victims to establish the scope and impact of the crimes. During one particularly difficult court appearance in Las Vegas, I testified about the long-term effects of Natalie's crimes on my life and career. The defendant, a man named Carlos Rivera, who had used Natalie's methods to defraud elderly victims, showed no remorse as I described the months of financial uncertainty and credit repair struggles I had endured. The defense claims that identity theft is a victimless crime, that insurance companies and financial institutions absorb the losses, I told the jury. But I want you to understand that real people bear the consequences of these crimes. Real people lose job opportunities, can't buy homes, can't rent apartments, and spend years fighting to restore their financial reputations. After my testimony, Rivera's defense attorney attempted to minimize the impact by suggesting that victims of identity theft were simply inconvenienced rather than genuinely harmed. This argument was both insulting and legally misguided, as federal sentencing guidelines specifically recognize the serious impact of financial crimes on victims. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Chang, presented evidence showing that Rivera's criminal organization had targeted over 50 elderly victims across Nevada and Arizona, stealing more than $2.3 million using techniques directly derived from Natalie's instruction manuals. The systematic targeting of vulnerable populations demonstrated the predatory nature of identity theft networks. Rivera was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a longer sentence than Natalie had received due to his leadership, role in the criminal organization, and his targeting of elderly victims. The judge specifically noted that the crimes had caused immeasurable harm to victims who trusted that their personal information would be protected by the financial institutions they had done business with for decades. 3 years after the initial discovery of the Mercedes loan, I continued to receive periodic updates from federal investigators about new developments in cases connected to Natalie's criminal network. The FBI had established a specialized task Force focused on combating the specific type of systematic identity theft that my sister had pioneered, and they regularly consulted with victims to understand the long-term impacts of these crimes. Agent Chen, who had been promoted to supervise the task force, invited me to speak at law enforcement conferences about the victim's perspective on identity theft investigations. These presentations were emotionally challenging but professionally rewarding, as they helped train agents to better understand the complex needs of victims navigating the financial recovery process. One of the things we've learned from Madison's case is that victim cooperation is essential for building strong federal cases, Agent Chen would tell audiences of law enforcement professionals. But cooperation requires trust, and trust requires investigators who understand that victims are dealing with both financial and psychological trauma. My involvement in law enforcement training led to opportunities to testify before congressional committees considering legislation to strengthen identity theft protections and improve victim assistance programs. The experience of addressing federal lawmakers about the need for better victim services was intimidating, but ultimately empowering. During one congressional hearing, I emphasized the importance of streamlining the credit repair process for verified victims of federal crimes. Currently, victims must fight the same battles with multiple creditors, even when federal investigators have already proven that accounts were opened through criminal fraud, I testified. This system re-victimizes people who have already suffered enough. The hearing resulted in bipartisan support for legislation that would create standardized procedures for removing fraudulent accounts from credit reports when victims could provide federal law enforcement documentation. While the legislative process was slow, the proposed changes offered hope for future victims who might face similar challenges. The experience of testifying in courtrooms and congressional hearings had an unexpected effect on my career trajectory. My expertise in financial crimes and victim advocacy became valuable to my employer, Morrison & Associates, which began taking on more cases involving financial fraud investigations for corporate clients. My promotion to Director of Financial Crimes Analysis came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to lead a team of analysts specializing in detecting and preventing identity theft, targeting businesses and their employees. The work combined my finance background with the hard-won expertise I had gained through being victimized myself. Madison's unique perspective as both a financial professional and a victim of sophisticated fraud makes her invaluable in helping our clients understand their vulnerabilities. My boss explained to potential clients. She can identify red flags that other analysts might miss because she's seen these techniques used in real-world criminal operations. The professional recognition felt validating after years of feeling like a victim defined by someone else's crimes. I was finally able to transform my traumatic experience into professional expertise that could help protect others from similar harm. My personal life had also stabilized in ways I hadn't expected during the darkest days of the investigation. I had met someone, Dr. James Sullivan, a forensic psychologist who worked with white-collar crime victims, through my volunteer work with the Identity Theft Support Group. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual understanding of trauma recovery and shared commitment to helping others heal from financial crimes. What I admire most about you is how you've refused to let your sister's crimes define your future, James told me one evening as we discussed my continued involvement in victim advocacy. You could have retreated from anything related to financial crimes, but instead, you've chosen to become an expert who helps others. Our relationship felt different from anything I had experienced before the identity theft. I was more cautious about sharing personal information, more aware of how trust could be violated, but also more appreciative of genuine honesty and transparency. The trauma had made me a more discerning judge of character, ultimately leading to healthier relationships. 4 years after Natalie's sentencing, I received another letter from federal prison. This time, her words reflected a deeper understanding of the ripple effects her crimes had created beyond just my personal experience. Madison, I've been learning about the other victims of the criminal network that grew from my actions. FBI victim advocate who visits here has told me about elderly people who lost their retirement savings, immigrants who had their credit destroyed just as they were trying to build lives in America, and families who couldn't buy homes because of fraudulent debt in their names. Her letter continued, "I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I understand now that my crimes weren't just against you. They were against hundreds of innocent people who trusted that their personal information would be protected. I created a blueprint for destroying lives, and that knowledge haunts me every day." Natalie went on to describe educational programs she was participating in at the Federal Correctional Facility, including classes on business ethics and victim impact awareness. She had become involved in a program where incarcerated individuals wrote letters to victims of similar crimes, not seeking forgiveness but acknowledging the human cost of financial fraud. "I hope that someday I can contribute to preventing others from making the choices I made. Maybe I can speak to people tempted by financial crimes, help them understand the real consequences before they destroy lives the way I destroyed yours." Reading her letter, I felt something I hadn't expected, a small measure of hope that her incarceration might ultimately serve some constructive purpose. While nothing could undo the damage she had caused, her apparent genuine understanding of that damage suggested the possibility of meaningful redemption. The letter arrived at a particularly meaningful time, as I was preparing to publish an article about identity theft recovery in a major financial magazine. The piece, titled "Rebuilding After Betrayal, A Victim's Guide to Financial Recovery," would reach thousands of readers dealing with similar challenges. Writing the article had forced me to reflect on how completely my life had changed since that morning when I first discovered the Mercedes loan approval letter. The person who had stood in her kitchen 4 years earlier, trembling with shock and betrayal, seemed like a different person entirely. The experience had fundamentally altered my understanding of resilience, justice, and the possibility of transforming trauma into strength. Today, as I write these final words, I'm sitting in my new home, a house I was able to purchase after my credit was fully restored and my career had advanced beyond what I had imagined possible before the crisis. The mortgage approval process was surprisingly smooth, a testament to how completely I had been able to rebuild my financial reputation. The house represents more than just financial recovery. It symbolizes my refusal to let someone else's crimes permanently define my possibilities. Every room reflects choices made from a position of strength rather than victimhood, furnished with items I selected because I wanted them, not because I was limited by someone else's financial sabotage. My work continues to evolve, incorporating lessons learned from hundreds of identity theft victims I've worked with through law enforcement partnerships and victim advocacy organizations. Each case reinforces my understanding that financial crimes are never truly victimless, and that recovery requires not just repairing credit reports, but rebuilding confidence in one's ability to protect and advocate for oneself. The relationship with James has deepened into something I never thought possible during those dark months when trust seemed like a luxury I could no longer afford. We're planning to marry next spring, a decision that represents my complete rejection of the fear and isolation that identity theft victims often experience. Love and trust remain possible, even after the most profound betrayals. As for Natalie, she still has 6 years remaining on her federal sentence. Whether we will ever have a relationship again remains an open question, one I'm not ready to answer. Forgiveness may be possible someday, but it will be forgiveness offered from a position of strength, not weakness. The criminal networks that grew from her methods continue to be dismantled by federal law enforcement, with new arrests occurring regularly across the country. Each prosecution represents justice for victims and serves as a deterrent to others who might be tempted by the apparent ease of identity theft. My story continues, but it's no longer a story defined by victimization. It's a story of recovery, resilience, and the transformation of trauma into purpose. The woman who discovered that fraudulent loan approval letter could never have imagined that her worst nightmare would ultimately lead to her greatest strength. For anyone facing similar betrayal, know that recovery is possible. Justice may be slow, but it is attainable. And most importantly, you are stronger than you realize, capable of rebuilding not just your credit score, but your entire sense of who you are and what you can achieve. The nightmare that began with a single piece of mail ended with the discovery that I was capable of far more than I had ever believed possible. That, perhaps, is the most valuable thing that survived my sister's crimes, an unshakable confidence in my own resilience and worth. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.